what you're all talking about. We need to maintain a standard of decency. When last was a census conducted to show the correct population? Why the likes integrate? People would be dressed anyhow if you let them. I am pay. I see Sky Nature. I am paying Digicel more than that right now, and I'm still struggling with this internet here. So, to be fair, it is Digicel I have, and I'm pretty sure I'm paying more than that. And the internet still does what it wants, when it wants, how it wants. Digicel is the boss. They do me as they please apparently over here. Well, as the saying goes, there's money in the care and not the cure. Are we back up? Yes, we're back up on YouTube. One of the reasons I like to ensure the YouTube is running is because it saves the stories. If anyone here misses a bit of the story serenity over on Instagram, a person should never be inconvenienced because they have on a shoe with toe exposed. I agree with that. Yes, the reason I like to have the YouTube running, even if it sticks, is if you miss a piece of the story and you like to go back and see it over, you can go on YouTube, Nathan Spring on YouTube, subscribe to my channel, and you'd see those things again. Whoa, that's shocking, and I run more devices. Yeah, I'm not sure. It may be something that I have to work through with my with my setup in streaming, possibly. So I guess I'd have to tweak some things and see. But all right. Out goes colonial dress code. A vestige of colonialism, says Farley. Tobago House of Assembly Chief Secretary Farley Augustine got down to serious business yesterday by upgrading contract workers and throwing out the colonial requirement for citizens to be dressed in a certain way to access services. The new THA administration promised sweeping changes in the first quarter of 2022, with Augustine announcing a number of new initiatives to be rolled out in the upcoming months. Speaking at a post-executive media briefing, Augustine announced that 133 temporary contract employees under the Tobago Regional Health Authority will be upgraded from monthly contracts to 3-year contracts if under the age of 60. Now, that bit, I personally think that little bit there is more important than the dress code. That little bit of information there, where he upgraded some of those contract workers. What did he use to measure the water deficit? He never said what was used to measure the water deficit. He just said there is a water deficit, and I suppose we take his word for it. Yes, what he said in the initial bit there about changing the contract workers and expanding yes, and expanding the I was just distracted for a bit. And expanding the length of time these contract workers are on a contract for. That is very important. They need to do that for doctors too. I have friends who are doctors and getting 1-month contracts. They need to do that all over the system. There are people existing all over the public service that work There are people currently all over the public service that work on contract basis from month to month. And what that does is it takes away security from someone. You don't have the security of your job because you never know how long your job is going to be there for. As far as you know, your job is there for 3 months. And then at the end of that 3 months, then you have to go cap in hand as it were begging for another job. And here's the real nefarious part of that to me. Here's where that gets kind of nearly down to the side of evil. Part of the reason that I'm not saying this government or any specific government, I'm not calling any names, but part of the reason that some governments like things to function on that level is because it gives the giver of the contract a lot more power. it gives the giver of the contract a lot more power, because you have to come back to me for the extension of that contract. While if I give you the job, and you have this job, this is your job, and the contract says you have this job for 6 months going. Now, well, not 6 months. That's really short. The contract says you have this job for 10 years going. Then I could have some security knowing that I could even be a little braver in doing some things. I could even try and make my name here, put down some roots, because I cannot just be fired for any reason. But with a contract, what makes for better workers though, we'd see. But with a contract, it doesn't give that security. Now, someone is saying it makes for better workers. I may have agreed with that if we were talking about the private sector. In the private sector, I might agree. I could see the possibility in the private sector that it makes sense that contracts could give you some better workers, because the workers have the motivation of knowing that if you don't do as management likes, you could lose the job. And many private companies, they substitute for that and allow for that, by having a probationary period which functions as it were on a contract basis. That's why a lot of people want to leave contributing to the brain drain. That's what I'm getting to. But when you're talking about the public service and you have people functioning on a contract basis, nearly all of the time, the people who are responsible for extending these contracts have some political sway. I know they don't have to renew, but what's the motivation to do well? People aren't hired in the public service based upon how well they do. That's not what gets you renewed in the public service. It isn't. So it doesn't create an incentive for better work. That's not what is happening by giving these workers contract. It creates an incentive for more loyalty to the authority structure. That's what it does in the public service. So you have to be a lot more loyal to whoever is directly above you that has control over extending your contract. And that's what the contract business does in the public sector. In the private sector, I may have taken that argument that it increases the efficiency of the workers. They always have that hanging over their head. You can't get a mortgage or financing when you're on a short-term contract. Very true, because you have no job stability. Can't fully agree with that. It's ruining a lot of things for especially those in the younger generation. You can't build a life based on that kind of contract 3 month to 3 month basis. Not can't, but it's a lot more difficult. All right, let's see what else Mr. Farley got around to saying. Based on assessment, we have 133 employees whose employment status are viewed as temporary. 133 employees, temporary working status. COVID temporary, and for those 133 workers, once you are under the age of 60, you will automatically be offered a 3-year contract immediately. Those workers within the TRHA viewed as temporary, you have a little more stability in your employment status. We are doing that because we recognize there is a need to fix the system. We will not have you languishing in 3-month or 1-year contracts, he said. I kind of agree with that. The public sector is sickeningly inefficient. Something have to change. Did he drop for anyone else? Very true. They're running you like a dog. I agree. Yeah, I know I went off there for a second. That was a battery warning, so we can't go forever tonight. I agree with what Empress Rooney said there. The public sector is sickeningly inefficient. Something has to change. I agree. The public sector is very inefficient. It's frustratingly so. If you ever try to get anything done in the public sector, you would see that, this thing is difficult. I agree. Something needs to change. But the thing that needs to change, I wouldn't say, is contract basis jobs. I don't think that would work. I don't think that would actually increase the efficiency. What I'm looking at is the motivation you have, what incentive it gives. If you want efficiency to increase, there needs to be incentive for increased efficiency. It needs to have a structure where the most efficient person makes more money, the most efficient person goes up the ladder, the most efficient person is the one that has the contract renewed. That's not the current system in our public service, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure how to get such a system working in a service that is built under a political structure. There is no incentive for contract workers in the public sector. Paid on task completed. I don't mind that, but not everything can be done like that. Some tasks are very difficult to qualify and to quantify, and how exactly would you pay them based on certain tasks, and who would measure which task is more difficult? Are you saying this task should be paid more than this task, and who quantifies that? It gets into a lot of technicality. Public service has a management issue. Yes, it does, and the management goes right up to the politicians. So then we have a politician issue. And yes, it's easy to talk about changing the management, but that's not changing the management. Very likely it's exchanging the management. It would just go to whoever next the politicians have in mind, and it would be the same thing again in some extent. All right, now to the colonial dress code. Colonial dress code. Augustine also overturned the current dress code requirements at THA offices for members of the public. While employees will still be required to assume professional attire, he said no members of the public should be turned back based on what they are wearing. To be clear and to be fair, he is talking about members of the public. And I think, to again continue in agreement with Mr. Farley to some extent, I think members of the public aren't in the same category as members of staff. They aren't the same thing. Members of the public aren't the same thing as staff. Going on. He referred to current requirements as a vestige of colonialism and said that the Assembly's chief administrator should notify of the change. Effective immediately, we will be asking the chief administrator to send out a circular notifying of the change in policy with regards to the dress code for people seeking services in THA offices. As soon as that notice is out, those clumsily written signs about no shorts, no sleeveless, and no slippers, we will all serve the people regardless. Entities like schools that require specialized outfits will retain their dress code policy. We are not the first Caribbean country to do this. It is about shaking off the vestiges of colonialism that we have held onto for their life. No one can convince us that we ought to turn people back because they are wearing slippers. The taxpayers are paying us. We will dress professionally and serve the people however they come. Wear them muds tonight. Good question, Empress Rooney. Very good question. The public need to know how to dress when they are going to do business. The culture is to work easy. Okay. The public need to know how to dress when they are going to do business. Fair enough. I understand. True, the public does. But if someone is paying for a service, and this is why it's, to put it in the words of the chief secretary, it's a vestige of colonialism. And the reason being, if you are paying for a service, generally speaking, once you are paying and what you are wearing isn't inhibiting you from actually getting the service done, a trace mark or visible sign left by something. I just made that search there in the YouTube live to make sure anyone who's there could see it. Right. If you're going to get a service done, it's more about whether you're paying for the service or not. If I'm paying for the service, especially for certain things where whether I have on a slipper or not is totally irrelevant. Like, think about that. In a country where you have a tourism industry, you have to take off your slipper, put on a shoe, Imagine if everyone had the IQ of Mr. Springer in general, how nice the country would be. Imagine if you had to go put on a shoe to get something in a tourist-based economy. That really doesn't make sense. The chief secretary in the article following this story in the Newsday version of it gave an example of something he said. Augustine said he had heard multiple reports of tourists coming off cruise ships being prevented from entering the Division of Tourism building in Scarborough. He said he once heard a story on Radio Tambourine about a man being debarred entry to the Board of Inland Revenue because he wore a three-quarter pants. He said the man borrowed a dress which was shorter than the three-quartered pants and was allowed in. How does that make sense? That in itself speaks to the ridiculous nature of that dress code. That cannot be how we do business in the tropics. The policy is being shifted for the first time in the country, and it starts in Tobago. He put on a dress. He put on a dress. You know, in Guyana, you can't enter no government agency if not dressed properly. Yes, and that's the point he is making. A lot of the Caribbean countries still have setups like this, and it isn't based on any practical reason. It is based on a colonial mindset where the colonial heads, the colonial bosses, the colonists, and proper. And you had to dress in the manner that the colonists said you had to dress, not in a manner suiting to the climate we currently are in. It was, yes, I had to make sure, I had to have some equality in the system. I can't have only male moderators. We have to, balance the system here. Get a female moderator in the system. So, that's the reason they were saying it's a colonial mindset. It's a vestige of colonialism. That's the way the colonial systems were built. And if you go into many of those colonial countries now, they have thrown away many of those bondage-like systems that they had us colonial countries beholden to. They have thrown off a lot of it, and we still in the hot tropics still have a lot of those things going on. I agree with that. Even I'm not saying that we throw out all sense of decency. I still think there needs to be a limit what you can wear, maybe if you modify it to the accommodations more. Maybe. But the thing is, I think the limit needs to be set culturally. You need to set a cultural limit. There needs to be a sense of propriety where someone understands if you're going into an official office, you don't go in dressed a certain way because you won't be treated with much seriousness. There is a time and place for different dress codes. Understandable. That's understandable. I agree. But when you reach down to actually trying to draw it out, it becomes very difficult. And you start to dance in between the lines. And especially when you're talking about modern clothing, it gets even more complex. Don't mind the dress code once it's not a vest and cream your ankle. I feel personally pained by that. Sometimes my ankle be getting real ashy out there. And in that Tobago sun, when it dry out your skin, the ash flows evermore. You know, when they are going for an interview, they would dress accordingly. That's true, because you dress accordingly for an interview. But if I'm going into a government building, if I'm going to the beach and I just have one quick errand to run in a government building, I find it ridiculous that if I have on a proper one of those, I'm not sure the proper name of it, but like a little Nautica something, not these super short ones that have you looking too sexy out there, right above the knees, and I'm looking decent, and I have on a slipper. Why can't I go into a government building? Are you really telling me that I must go home, get a long pants, get a sneakers, and then come back out there? I didn't say I was dressed for the beach. I meant if I was going to the beach and that's what I had on. Same should be done for entering government agencies. I agree. Government agencies shouldn't be too exclusive. The purpose of these government agencies are there so that they serve us, and you shouldn't be so exclusive that it becomes difficult for you to serve people. A shirt and long pants to collect a barrel. A shirt and long pants to collect a barrel in shed 10. That, exactly, I agree. Those things shouldn't be. Those things should not be. Imagine people walking with spare shoes and clothes in their trunks. But people do that. People do that because the rules get kind of ridiculous sometimes. I'm supposed to be doing CSEC past papers for my exam, but I'm listening to Nathan much more fun. What exam do you have coming up? What exam is that you're doing your past papers for? Taught some CXC for quite a while. Time to do away with those archive thinking. Accounts, well, no help there. I never did that one. I never did accounts. I did a little bit of accounts, but I never actually got very deep inside of that. The last story for the night, though. This is the final story for the night. And I found this. Well, actually, this wouldn't be the last story of the night. I'll say this as the last series of stories for the night. I had a friend turned away from the fire station because he had on shorts. He was going to collect a fire report after his home and all belongings. That's ridiculous. What is that? Over on Instagram, the Instagram chat, Serenity Sassy is saying that I had a friend turned away from the fire station because he had on shorts. He was going to collect a fire report after his home and all belongings were destroyed. What is that? That is insane. My home burned down. The shorts might be the last thing I have. You're going to tell me I have to go buy a jeans to come back and collect a fire report? That does not make sense. It does not add up. Worse yet in our climate, worse yet in our country, it does not make sense. We need to stop it. And one of the difficult things that the fact that Tobago did it first may cause is now for Trinidad to do it. For Trinidad to do it, you require the Trinidad government, the PNM government, to look as though they're following the PDP government over in Tobago. So, I don't know, but I feel I have less hope to see that happening, at least not very soon in Trinidad, because I'm not sure if the PNM government, even if they think it's a good idea, I'm not sure if I'm going to see them do that very quickly and look like they're following the PDP over in Tobago. Trinidad's politics is about race. Tobago seems to be thinking though so far. I've said this many times before what I think on that, but I am not going to say that somehow Trinidad politics is so much elevated from Tobago's politics in terms of the race idea, because Tobago's politics, to be fair to Trinidad, Tobago's politics cannot really be divided on a simple race line. It just doesn't work along that line. There's one predominant race in Tobago. Racial politics doesn't work the same in Tobago. All right, here's this story. It's on food prices and those effects going around. TNT's good cop, bad cop role in higher global flour prices. Last week's announcement by National Flour Mills has prompted many to wonder how their pockets will be affected going into 2022, as increased flour costs has already started a ripple effect of price increases in TNT. But while the price increase has been seen as detrimental to most, Finance Minister Colm Imbert is smiling all the way to the bank. Interesting. Why would the finance minister be smiling all the way to the bank? You see, here's where they get in. You see, what we have to understand is that the surge in wheat prices and therefore flour prices is in part due to higher ammonia prices. TNT is a major beneficiary of higher ammonia prices, and it has helped pour foreign exchange into the country and money into the government's coffers. In NFM's release, the company noted the increased prices of grain and the rise in the supply chain costs are affecting markets worldwide. Generally, adverse weather conditions have affected crop yields, supply chain issues have increased the cost of agricultural inputs like fertilizers, and the overall impact of COVID-19 has caused shipping costs to skyrocket. Government never wanted to diversify the economy and invest in agriculture. Exactly. In NFM's, right, ammonia is used worldwide as it is considered one of the most important chemicals produced globally, with approximately 85% being used as fertilizer for food production. TNT, according to a 2019 estimate, listen to this, TNT, according to a 2019 estimate, is the second largest exporter of ammonia in the world. TNT is the second largest exporter of ammonia in the world, after Russia and well ahead of Indonesia. Yes, we are. We are indeed. At the Point Lisas Industrial Estate, there are 11 ammonia plants that include 2 ammonia complexes, which house some of the largest ammonia production plants in the world, with a total annual capacity of 5.2 million metric tons. Fertilizers are required as crop growth. Yes, we know that. And 2020 was a bumper year for fertilizers and ammonia, as in some cases prices rose to record highs amid various challenges. According to the data transmission network Progressive Farmer, the retail price of anhydrous ammonia set a record in the United States of $1,113 per ton in November, surging up 38%. The 7 major fertilizers tracked saw an increase ranging from 9% to 36%. So we saw an increase in prices. The November surge was similarly noted in Central Bank's monetary policy report for November, as it stated during the review period, significant price increases were recorded for ammonia, 237.6%. So, in other words, we're balling out here in ammonia. The cause of the increase in wheat prices is giving us more money. However, on the flip side, the wheat prices are increasing our flour prices, beating us more. The government should have done and removed the import tax on food items. It would increase. Yeah. So our local ammonia is selling very, very well in the foreign markets, and we are making money for this. Now, here's where I have problems when you see government running things. When we make more money from ammonia, when we as a country make more money from ammonia, that doesn't really go to the individual. That goes to the country's coffers for the most part. And when we're talking about the country's coffers, we're talking about government spending. So the government is making more money right now, but how do they spend that money? Import tax on food, because it encourages local spending, which is better for the economy. I'm seeing some people talking about that, whether we increase or decrease the tax on food coming in. Which way you would prefer it? If we increase the tax on food coming in, it could encourage more people to buy locally, and more people would buy local food. And okay, I see that point. But the problem in that is very likely you're going to end up with a heavy increase in food prices. And you're going to force people into local markets, where now they may have to face a more predatory pricing scheme, because the market is much smaller. And here's the thing. Put a price ceiling. Wow. Y'all no, the problem is not solved. The problem is not solved. By putting a price ceiling, the problem is not solved. Listen, if I made this example. There aren't enough incentives for farmers as it is. I made this example in a previous live. If I am producing bananas and I'm selling it at the price I think the market is worth for my prices, and the government says that you need to only sell it at this price, what that is going to do, if that is outside of my budget and I wouldn't be making the profit I desire, I would stop selling it. I would stop. I just wouldn't sell it. And you'd lose me out of the market. There are many countries that tried price controls. Venezuela tried it. Our good old neighbors, Venezuela, they tried price controls and it didn't work out good at all because you can't force the market to do what you want. People don't work like that. Give subsidies so production is cheaper. To give subsidies, they need to get money. And what that is going to cause is now the government, and bear in mind, think of this, Princess Stella, as you're doing accounts there, so a future business person in the making. The government doesn't make much of its own money. A lot of the government's money comes from taxpayers. So you're now asking taxpayers to pay farmers so that they'll keep their prices cheaper. So in the long run, it's nearly the same thing as the farmers, as the taxpayer paying an increased price for the goods anyhow, because cumulatively the farmers are making the same amount of money. That's the way the subsidies work. And the subsidies don't actually benefit in the long run because of that. Guyana still have price control on imported products. Price control on imported products, nearly every country has that. And the reason for that, especially when you're talking about smaller countries, that's all right. You learn much more in time. The price controls on imported products get very important because if you think of it like this, if I have goats and I'm growing my goats on grass over here in Trinidad and Tobago, I don't have enough space to grow enough goats that would sell it for cheap enough to compete with the prices that someone who may be cutting down acres or hectares of the Brazilian rainforest and growing it there may be able to. Just because they are able to grow so much, the scale of their market is so much bigger than mine, their price would automatically be lower. Now, for that reason, I understand why you charge an increased price on foreign products. Even massive markets like the United States right now, are looking, well, not right now, but the previous president in the United States was looking to do some price controls and some more stringent measures on China. Because, for example, I'm on the Chinese social media website now, so TikTok spare me a little bit. China, boss, good, right. But China uses next to free labor. There's a word for that, an S word, slavery. China uses basically slavery labor to get a lot of their work done. And when you're using labor that costs you cents for the hour, the price you could make your goods at would outcompete any free market where they have proper labor laws. Ali, is my first night on the job, like the live make me look good. Yeah, like up the live, make sure you're hitting that like button wherever you are on whichever of the lives. Make sure that like button knows your existence. It knows you're there. Not just one touch, a couple of taps to, make sure you wake it up. Good night, thanks for educating and breaking down. No problem, it's my pleasure, quite literally. Yes, so, for example, China has those super low prices they get their labor done with. Like, they have some provinces where they have re-education camps, where some people who don't listen properly, they are disobedient to the Chinese government. I'm really disappointed. The China fan that Mr. Martin M., the Chinese fan, I don't know if he's in the chat today. He was in the chat another day supporting China. But they're re-educating some of the people that don't listen properly to the government. And and have them in these re-education camps where they're working them and they're making products to sell overseas. And then when you see these Chinese products selling for $10, there's literally no way you can create that product for that price. There's just no way we can do that. So the Chinese would win the market. They would be able to flood the market. And then the next side of this is the Chinese country, the Chinese government, runs their economy. So they would be able to decide that, hey, yes, I know it skipped. My battery is now on 10%, so we don't have much more time. The Chinese government would also be able to decide, okay, we could sell something at a loss and flood a market and knock out all of the competition. So for example, if we have someone in Trinidad, what's something that someone in Trinidad likes to make per se? If someone in Trinidad is making, they're making hats. They're making hats, right? Someone in Trinidad is going through the process. Like one of my moderators, yes, I view your content, Mr. Moderator, is a tailor out there. He has some sharp and spiffy clothing going. Nice for him. Check out Mr. J. Chris. So he's making clothing there. Let's say his precise design that he is making is sold to a Chinese factory. And those Chinese factories get some little kids making less than a cent a day to be spitting out that in mass. And then they come in the local market and they sell them all for $20. Mr. J. Chris is out of business. He cannot work for half day sewing a shirt and then sell it for $20. That's just not profitable for him. But the Chinese can. So that's why you try to have some price controls. Anything coming in from the foreign market, you're going to have a price control on it, saying that you cannot sell below this price. We're going to tax you so much that if you bring this clothing into our local market, we tax you so much that you'd have to sell the clothing for $200 because we're taxing you $150. Yes, those tariffs. But here's how those tariffs work on the flip side. And I know some of my moderators know this story very well. How those tariffs work on the flip side is the government can do that to secure a monopoly in the local environment, in the local ecosystem, like they did for TCL by raising the tariff on the competitors who may be importing goods to compete on this market. You could kick out the competition and lock in a local monopoly and saying that you're helping those local, but who you're helping locally are your friends. So one of the things that I regularly pound in this point. One of the things that this PNM government really loves to do is they love to do that precise thing. So when they came into government, they raised some online taxes, they raised some taxes on the import of cars, and the import of nearly everything. Because yes, that's helping you to buy local. Go shop in Francis Fashion Shoe Locker for the very same thing you can buy online. And that's where I have a really massive problem. If something is really a local company, if you're telling me that I should really buy from someone who planted their cassava locally, they reap their cassava with local work, and they process their cassava, and this is cassava flour from a local buyer. Okay, you could get me on that argument. But in the case of TCL, the majority of TCL is owned by a Mexican company. They're making the money from that monopoly. In the case of the clothing locally, the vast majority of local clothing stores don't sell locally made and designed clothing. I'm not shopping local by me going into a local clothing store. They're selling me the same clothes I could buy on Amazon just for a markup where they're making the profit. So what sense does it make that now I have to pay them an increased profit instead of me just buy it from their same suppliers? I don't believe in that kind of buying local. And that's my problem oftentimes when the government gets involved. Yes, the government is needed in some things to, make sure we're protecting some of our local entrepreneurs, some of our local manufacturers, because we just may not be able to survive on the international market. But so often when the government comes in, what they actually do is create a system that makes it more suitable for their own friends. And that's not to the benefit of any one of us. Let me see this YouTube live. I think that's down for the count. Okay. This isn't done yet. Live still up. All right. Correct, only local small businesses does get my money. If not, then shine. Do you have the links for your articles? By the way, small local business in Instagram be the best. I used to have all the links in the YouTube live, and the YouTube live you'd actually see the articles pulled up and scrolling past as I read them. But it's a bit of work sometimes now to go in the description and put them. But I'll try to get that back. I try to get that back up as things get smoother and running, to get those links there, because I like to make sure there's the link to the source of all of this so you could go and find it yourself. It's really good information. All right. And added to that, what I wanted to add to that, this is the final article. Hopefully my battery lasts. If you all just see me disappear, well, the battery died, and my apologies. But the last bit I'm going to speak about is where MSJ, the Movement for Social Justice, that's the party created by some members of the labor union, and it's interesting to see what their suggestions are, especially noting the previous stance we were speaking about, where we were talking about how the government gets involved and what the government does when they get involved. News: MSJ wants expanded school feeding program, more tax for big businesses. The MSJ went on there to basically say that they want the school feeding program to be expanded. Feed more children in the country. And listen, I like that idea. That idea sounds beautiful. You don't want hungry children in the country. But how do we feed them? Where does the money come from to feed them? And here's how that goes when it's a government doing that. You ask the government to feed more children. What that means is the government hires a caterer to do it. Now, I personally know that some of the caterers hired by the government to do some of those caterings are friends and family of government ministers. So by you saying what you really want in the country is to see more children fed, usually what you end up doing is giving more money to politicians' friends. That's why usually for nearly anything, my stance is less power and less resources to the government. If a government spends $50 billion and they spend it inefficiently and corruptly, how much more money do you think that government needs in order to start spending it efficiently? There would be no amount of money that a government would get that they would spend efficiently. So to make it become a politician best friend. Yeah, that's what it could seem like. And where the movement for social justice was suggesting that we get that money from, the money to spend on school feeding programs, etc., is Abdullah suggested businesses provide subsidized lunches or meals to workers who have not had wage increases. He also called on government and other stakeholders to consider alternatives. The MSJ leader also pointed to the after-tax increases of several large businesses, saying increased taxation on large corporations can provide the funding for the social program the party has suggested. Tax them more. The wealthy have to pay more and contribute more. As our national pie is shrinking, their share is getting bigger. That is wrong. That is unfair. That he is suggesting is the very idea of socialism, where you tax those who have more to give those who have less. And that's a beautiful sounding idea. The average person would be cruel to think, no, we wouldn't do it. That's cruel, of course. If you have more resources, we take that from you and give some to the poor. But here's the problem in all those cases: the middleman. You see, When you tax the rich to give to the poor, you don't actually tax the rich to give to the poor. You tax the rich to give to the government, for the government to see about the poor. That's my problem. I really don't have a problem if there was some way where we could have ensured that some of that extra wealth from the wealthiest end up at some of the lowest levels. And there is inequity in our system, there's inequality, and not all of it is fair. And that's understandable. When you look at the amount of resources some people are given for the job they do, and then you look at some people who do a comparatively harder job, quite literally, and they are given much less. But the solution for that oftentimes doesn't involve the government. Many times when the government gets involved, the solution you're hoping to find gets worse. That's why I continually see the solution we're looking for is cultural. You're looking to try and change a culture. Because if you change the culture, then you'd eventually change the government also. One of the examples I look at, this is just a thought I've had before. Many people look at garbage collectors, men who work standing at the back of those garbage trucks, picking up every